What's going on, guys? Jacob here as always, and today I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently. I have a lot of footage to cover because I was waiting on tools for my engine, so I hopped around a little bit, but I'm going to splice up the footage to make it line up correctly. And also I'm trying to catch us up to real time so that when I'm recording videos, I'm uploading it shortly after so that it's more real time. It would also be easier on me and videos would be uploaded more often. So anyways, no more waiting, let's go ahead and hop into it. So, as you can see, I did get the engine on the engine stand. I should have put this image up with the last video to show that I got it up, but nevertheless, I did get it on the stand, and I left the crane hooked up to it to make sure in case if the stand were to fail. I didn't know the integrity of the stand, so in case if the stand failed, it still had the crane, but there's no tension on the crane, so so this is it from the passenger side. Before I took anything off, it just transmission came off and then it sat. Here from the back you can see the oil filter housing, and then there's a coolant tube right there, coolant hose that connects through the firewall, I believe, for the heater, if I'm not mistaken. And here we can take a look at the front of the engine. I'm going to take, obviously, all of this off here. All this is coming off, and starting from the left, working our way to the right, we have number 1, that is our alternator. Number 2 is our idler pulley. Number 3 is our radiator fan pulley. If I'm not mistaken, it's actually just a pulley without the fan on it, and then it drives nothing else, not the water pump. The water pump is number 5. Number 4 is our crank pulley and harmonic balancer. 5, water pump. 6, you come down, we have our tensioner pulley. That's where you put your wrench to release the tension on the fan belt. 7, we have our AC compressor, and 8, we have our power steering pump. Below the alternator, if you take a look, there's some type of air pump. I don't know what its function is, but I'm going to do some research on it before I put it back on the car and find out if it's necessary. Anyways, we're taking a look here at the intake manifold, and as you can see, there is still a little bit of the fuel rail bracket on there. I will be replacing the fuel rail because I had to cut it up a little bit to, well, over the years, really. I wasn't so good a couple years ago. I was still kind of learning, and I didn't know how to get some of these bolts undone. These are actually kind of difficult, so I have excuses. But you can see on the left side there's one bolt on top of the other, and then on the far right side you can see the same as well, and then you have 5 bolts through the middle, and then the very center bolt being for the fuel rail. The 2 bolts on the left and the 2 bolts on the right also hold a fuel rail, so there's a total of 5 bolts there that hold the fuel rail. And the one that I had a problem with was the farthest right bottom and the center one. Those 2 were difficult for me. I stripped out the center one pretty bad. And taking a look underneath, you can see the underside of the intake manifold, and this disconnects pretty easily. There's only 4 bolts right here that bring this off. I personally was curious about all of this. I had never pulled this off when the engine was in the car, and so this was all new information to me, and I wanted to make sure this gets out to everybody. It's pretty easy to get off as long as you can get your arms in there and not strip out these bolts, because I did it. Alright, so moving on here, I got everything, all the peripherals off the front of the engine, and you can see that I'm putting bolts back where they go, just to make sure that I'm not losing track of which bolts go where, because they're all different from each other for the most part, and they all have different lengths, and you can accidentally run one in straight through the block and damage something. I've seen it before. I've worked for a shop where people would bring in engines, and sometimes they put the wrong bolt in the wrong spot, just changing an alternator or something, and run into a coolant gallery and have to bring the block to get welded back up. So keep track of what bolts come out of where and put them back where they go, and then once you strip it down to a block, take each bolt out and build a diagram on a piece of cardboard and put all of it in there. You can see from the passenger side, here it is from the passenger side with the alternator and that what looked like an air pump off. And here it is with the intake off. From the passenger side, you can see all of the bolts are still in where they go, and this would be a perfect time to make that diagram with cardboard, because you can basically draw the engine out and then just draw circles where each bolt goes and then punch holes for the bolts. and run them straight through, and then you have a whole diagram of the entire side of the engine. You can't forget where they go then. And then here it is from the passenger side with the exhaust manifold off. Surprisingly, every single bolt came off pretty good. I did hit them 30 minutes or an hour previously with PB Blaster, and they came off pretty easy though. So whether or not the blaster is necessary, I would use it, you know, just WD-40, whatever you got. They came off pretty easy for me. And then here it is from the back, nice and skinny engine. I love it. Alright, and then here's all the parts that came off of it. It looks crazy, it really does, but it's pretty basic. If you just take a picture or two beforehand and just kind of like keep an idea of what's going on, then it's not hard, you know. If you're pulling an engine out of a car, then you probably have a pretty good concept of what's going on. And here's that center bolt. I ended up having to cut it with a Sawzall and a Dremel, and eventually I guess that I removed enough material from the head of the bolt, and it released the tension from behind it, and I hit it with a chisel, and it turned, so I was able to get it out with a hammer and chisel. Okay, I've got the timing cover off and the valve cover off at the top here. Everything looks pretty good. You can see where, when this vehicle sat, trying to get a good image of it here, you can see on the lobes right there, you can see little rings on it where it sat against the buckets. And oil left stains and rings. And it's on all of them. I just thought that was interesting though. But yeah, the plan is I need a triple square. Take a look down inside of there. That bolt that's in there is a triple square. Let me see if there's one that has less oil in it. Maybe this one. It's a little bit difficult to see, but it's a triple square. It is not a Torx. So I need to go pick up a set of triple square sockets. And I'm not going to take off the oil pan tonight, because if I take off the oil pan, I'm going to want to turn it over and take a look underneath, do the oil pump and everything, and I don't want to have oil spilling out of the head. So I'm just going to wait until tomorrow until I get a triple square, and then I can take the head off. And once I get the head off, then I will be able to flip it over and everything. Taking a look at everything, so it gives a little bit of a hint of what it's going to look like inside. I think we're going to look good. I don't see any scoring on anything. Looks pretty good to me, so. At this point, I was waiting on tools to take apart the engine further, so I decided to get my welder out and get it up and running. I hadn't done it yet up until this point, but I had picked it up from Amazon for about 400 bucks, something like that, just because I needed to do some framework on my car, and I needed to do some exhaust work for the turbo and everything. I'm not going to spend a fortune on turbo band-aid or something like that for an exhaust manifold, or any other parts of that matter. I'm going to do it myself because I'm trying to keep this build as low cost as possible. Anyways, so there's just a couple things I needed the welder for. Plus, if you have a workshop, you need a welder, and that's what I have. So anyways, take a look in here. I cut up the some parts of the frame here in the front because all of this was in, the car was in a front end collision, and it pushed in the driver front corner right here, and so the shop, I guess, that fixed it up and then sold it to me in the past, they kind of banged it out a little bit, but it wasn't so great. Things never really fit right, and panels never really fit right. So I cut all this up right here, and I took my truck, which also is missing the front bumper cover. It's also a work in progress. Regardless, I pulled this out as best I could to get it lined up, and I took some measurements between different places to make sure it was lined up. Then I hopped in there and welded up what I needed to weld, and it came out okay. Don't look at my welds too closely, they're not super pretty, but some of the welding accessories I needed were some new cups, the cover gas cups that I had with the welder, the ones that came with it, they were not like large enough. The opening was not large enough, and it wasn't covering my work well enough, and so I was getting some splattering of welding material and such. But regardless, it did the job. Not too bad. Alright, after cutting almost every single thing that is in here, and then straightening it and putting it back, it is almost
it is almost like the other side. And all the measurements for the bolt holes are good, and it is solid, so my welds will hold. Time to get panels on.
Okay, so that is how far we're going to get with this one. Took all the extras off of the engine, and next is taking off the head and taking off the timing stuff. And I fixed up the frame of the car, and it looks pretty good, honestly. I was able to get all the panels kind of tweaked around and get everything to line up better than it ever has before. So, as a side note, this is a 97 Mercedes, and I have the body style that's actually on it is the facelift W210, which comes after, I believe, 2001 through 2003. Those bodies were actually more common, and they have a nicer look to them, personally, I think. So I swapped my pre-facelift front body panels to a post-facelift body panels for the look, and eventually down the line, once I get it all painted the way I want, it'll look pretty good. Regardless, that's the end of this video. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll definitely be back for the next one. I'm really excited to keep bringing this to you guys because I just love doing this, and not too many people are taking this engine apart, and it really is a beautiful engine. It's a lot of fun, and I cannot wait for the fun I'm going to have down the road. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.